Good morning. We're the Warbes. We have been coming here to CCC about 3.5 years. We have two great kids. Our daughter Gabby is part of the Radical Youth group here, and our son Juan is in Texas and is getting ready to graduate college next month. I serve on the Connections team. I probably checked some of you guys in this morning, and Robert is usually found in that thing. Today's reading comes from the book of Luke, chapter 19, verses 28 through 48. And it reads, "And when he had said these things, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. When he drew near to Bethphage and Bethany, at the mount that is called Olivet, he sent two of the disciples, saying, 'Go into the village in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever yet sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say, 'This, the Lord has need of it.' So those who were sent away and found it just as he had told them. And as they were untying the colt, the owners said to them, 'Why are you untying the colt?' And they said, 'The Lord has need of it.' And they brought it to Jesus, and throwing their cloaks on the colt, they set Jesus on it. And as he rode along, they spread their cloaks on the road. As he was drawing near, already on the way down the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen, saying, 'Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest.' And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, rebuke your disciples.' He answered, 'I tell you, if these were silent, these very stones would cry out.' And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, 'Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace. But now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, and you and your children within you. And they will not leave one stone upon another in you, because you did not know the time of your visitation.' And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, 'It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers.' And he was teaching daily in the temple. The chief priests and the scribes and the principal men of people were seeking to destroy him, but they did not find anything they could do, for all the people were hanging on his words."
That was my bad, right? Okay. Sorry. So, one of my most favorite times of the year is here. Spring is upon us, right? I absolutely love springtime. To me, spring feels a lot like a new beginning. The plants, the beautiful flowers, everything begins to bloom. We see more and more wildlife out and about. The weather's warmer, and so we're out in the sunshine soaking up all the vitamin D that we've been deprived of for the last 6 months. And in the springtime, we see all of nature over the course of 2 or 3 weeks just kind of come back to life. And it really is an amazing thing. Wouldn't you guys just agree with that spring is like, can we just say thank you to Jesus for spring right now? Like, that's awesome. But for all of the things that I love about springtime, there's one thing that comes around every spring that I absolutely hate. Anybody want to guess what it is? Allergies is a good one. That's not what I was thinking. Yeah, somebody's like, cedar. I absolutely hate every spring when this comes around, and it's this: spring cleaning. And the reason I don't like spring cleaning, it's not because I'm lazy, it's because spring cleaning takes like 10 times as long with me than it should. You know, I'm the guy that has a really hard time getting rid of things that I don't need anymore, things that aren't beneficial. We've actually lived in our house in Berkeley for about 16 months now, and we're a 3-car family. We've got a 2-car garage. Guess how many cars we park in our garage? 0. Why? Because it's still filled with a ton of boxes. And the thing is, I know that I need to get rid of a lot of the things that are in my garage, but I don't, for whatever reason. I'll start cleaning out the garage, and then my wife will come out there like 3 hours later, and it's a bigger mess than when I started because I found like a wizard robe and my high school football helmet that I stole, and I'm like wearing it just because I found it. I've literally, true story, I have 2 entire moving boxes in my garage right now filled with VHS tapes. Get this, just in case they ever become valuable one day. That's what I tell my wife. Like, what benefit is that? What benefit is that to me? That we literally have people in our worship community, Abby and Sela, who led us this morning, did a great job. They don't even know what a VHS tape is. But here I am, hanging on to the giant 2-box set of Titanic. You know, you remember the ones that are huge because the movie was so long they had to put it on 2 tapes? And I'm holding on to it just in case it gets expensive. And I want to sell it one day. But whether we like to spring clean or we don't, there's one thing that I think we can all agree on, and that's this, that spring cleaning is necessary and spring cleaning is beneficial. We may not like doing yard work, but it's necessary for us to pull the weeds so the good grass can grow. We may not like cleaning out the shed, but finding our tools are a lot easier when all the junk's cleared out of the way. I don't want to clean out my garage, but when I do, my garage can now be used for what it was intended for. So spring cleaning is necessary and spring cleaning is beneficial. So I have a question for you this morning. Is there anything about yourself that you don't like? Is there anything in your life that needs to be cleared away? Are there any areas of your life that need a little spring cleaning so that you can be the person that you want to be, so that you can be the person that God wants you to be? I'm going to answer the question for you. The answer is yes. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to look at a time where Jesus did a little bit of spring cleaning. But we've got some stuff to cover before we get there. We're going to cover 3 things. We're going to cover the fact that Jesus is our Messiah and he is a king like no other. We're going to cover the importance of the temple. And we're going to cover why the cleansing of the temple was necessary and beneficial. So you guys ready? You ready? All right, let's jump in. In our passage today, we see something that we've likely heard before, and it's a story that tells about how as Jesus entered the city that first Palm Sunday, the crowd laid palm branches on the ground and they shouted, "Hosanna," which means, "Lord, save us," as he rode into town on a donkey. And that's why we call the Sunday before Easter every year Palm Sunday, to kind of remember and commemorate that event. And rightfully so, we should remember it and we should commemorate it because it was a big deal. It was a really big deal. We've been in Luke for 18 weeks now. But when we were in Luke chapter 9, there was a passage that we skipped over that I want to look at this morning. And it's in Luke chapter 9, verse 51. And it says this: "When the days drew near for him to be taken up, he set his face to go to Jerusalem. And he sent messengers ahead of him who went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make preparations for him. But the people did not receive him because his face was set towards Jerusalem." You see, Jesus had entered into Jerusalem many, many times over the course of his earthly ministry, and he'd enter into the temple as well. But going to Jerusalem this time, this first Palm Sunday, going to Jerusalem meant something very different for Jesus. This time, when he went into the city, it meant one thing: that it was time for him to die. And so, yes, going to Jerusalem for Jesus this particular Palm Sunday was a really big deal. And starting in Luke chapter 19, verse 28, we see Jesus on a journey from Jericho to Jerusalem. And the passage tells us that as Jesus drew near to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of his disciples into the village in front of him. Luke 19, verse 30, this is what Jesus says: "Go into the village in front of you, where on entering you will find a colt tied, on which no one has ever yet sat. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' you shall say this: 'The Lord has need of it.'" The Lord requires it. And that's exactly what happened. The two disciples who were sent, they went, they found the colt, verse 32, just as he had told them. So when the disciples start to untie the colt, naturally the owners see it happening. They go outside, they're like, yo, why you untying my colt? And the guys just look at him and they say, it's cool, the Lord has need of it. And then they're like, okay, cool. Don't you wish that would work today? Like you see somebody with a sweet Tesla and you're like, dude, I need your keys. Why? The Lord has need of it. It's not going to work, but that would be awesome, wouldn't it? But this colt we see in our passage today, he or she is actually playing a bigger role than we realize at first glance. This little colt is actually helping to proclaim the kingship and role of Jesus as the Messiah. In the Old Testament, Zechariah had already prophesied about this event when he wrote in Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." So here, Jesus is fulfilling a messianic prophecy, but it seems as though he is also making a deliberately bold statement about himself, and that statement is this: that I am the promised king of Israel. Because time and time again, throughout all of the Gospels, we see Jesus performing these miracles and then quickly telling those around him not to tell anybody about it. But here we see Jesus very openly and very publicly taking on his kingly role. First, by fulfilling the prophecy we just read in Zechariah chapter 9, but also by taking an animal to ride that did not belong to him. You see, Jesus didn't just steal somebody's donkey. That would have been a privilege afforded only to a king. And verse 30 of our passage specifically points out that upon this colt, no one had ever sat. In those days, an unridden colt, whether a donkey or a horse, would have been considered sacred, therefore making it appropriate for a king to ride, since a king's animal couldn't be ridden by anyone except the king, all right? So if we continue on, we see the public declaration that Jesus is indeed a king. In verse 35, we see that the disciples brought the unridden colt to Jesus. They placed their cloaks on its back, and then they sat Jesus on top of the donkey, which is a symbolic of an enthronement, so to speak. And as Jesus rode into Jerusalem with his face set towards Jerusalem, the crowd began to spread their cloaks on the road before him, which also carries a kingly royal connotation. So everyone who saw this happening would have recognized a king entering into the city. So as Jesus rides into Jerusalem, the crowd then begins to praise God, and they expressly identify him as a king in verse 38 when they shout out, "Blessed is the king who comes in the name of the Lord." So for the first time, Jesus is rightly being proclaimed as the king who comes in the name of the Lord, even though the crowds don't yet understand the full meaning of his kingship or his reign. So, here's where we are. We see Jesus declared as a king, and not just any king. He's a king like no other king ever. Well, how do we know that? How do we know that he's a king like no other king? Well, look with me, Luke 19, verse 39, "And some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, 'Teacher, rebuke your disciples.' And he answered and said, 'If these were silent, the very stones would cry out.'" You see what Jesus is saying right here? He's saying, listen, not only do I have kingly authority as the king of Israel and the Messiah, but I also have authority over nature as well. I walk on water. I raise dead people back to life. I make lame people walk. I heal diseases. I cast out demons. And if my disciples were to be silenced, I have the authority to cause even these stones to cry out and worship in me. I'm a king like no other. I came not to be served, but to serve, redeem a sinful people to God, and restore all of creation that was broken by the fall. Church, Jesus will restore all of the brokenness that we see in this world one day. And it started right here. With his face set towards Jerusalem, Jesus enters into the city. So the stage is set. We have a king like no other king, and he's headed to the temple. And that's where a king belongs to be, right? In the temple. In those days, the temple was very important. We've got a picture of it. It looked something like that. It was a very important place. It was sanctified. It was set apart for God. Not only was the temple considered to be the place where God's presence dwelled in the Holy of Holies, it was a place where rabbis would teach and sacrifices would be made, and the temple symbolized the central authority of Judaism. The temple was a symbol of holiness and purity and the dwelling place of God. It was a place where worship happened. So this was a pretty important place, right? And this temple was an impressive structure. I mean, just look at it. That's about 35 acres, if that puts into idea how big it is. But when people were traveling into Jerusalem, the temple would have stood out up on the hill area. It would have been the primary focus when they were coming into the city. And we've got a diagram here that's kind of the inner workings of the temple. If you look there, that black square is the altar, and that kind of bigger area up there is the actual temple, and that was the Holy of Holies. Only the priests could enter into that area. But the temple was surrounded by 3 courts. Right on the outside, you see where those 3 dots are. That would be the court of Israel. That would be the place where Israelite men were allowed to go. And then further down around, you've got the women's court, and that would have been any place that Israelite men and women could go. But the court of the Gentiles, there on the outside. The court of the Gentiles was the furthest court from the temple, and it was the closest place that any person who was not a Jew could get to the actual sanctuary. Okay? And Jesus is about to walk up in here and do some spring cleaning. But I need us to remember that because it's very important. It's going to come back into play in a minute. But something interesting happens on Jesus' way to the temple that, in my opinion, seems to kind of interrupt the flow of the story. So up until this point, we see Jesus. He's presenting himself as a king. He's headed to the temple. But something happens on his way that we shouldn't overlook. Look with me, Luke chapter 9, verse 41. And when he drew near and saw the city, he wept over it, saying, "Would that you, even you, had known on this day the things that make for peace, but now they are hidden from your eyes. For the days will come upon you when your enemies will set up a barricade around you and surround you and hem you in on every side and tear you down to the ground, you and your children within you, and they will not leave one stone upon another because you did not know the time of your visitation." I got to be real honest with you guys right now. I read those 4 verses, and I, a little bit, think to myself, man, Jesus wept at odd times. Seriously, think with me for a second. Just track with me. I want us to kind of press in because I want us to try to see Jesus as he is. At first glance, Jesus weeping here makes sense to me because Jesus is 100% truly a man. So that means he got sick, he felt pain, he laughed, he cried, he got angry, as we're going to see in a moment. He likely had a favorite place where he liked to sit and pray, maybe beside the sea or in the mountains. He got hungry, he got thirsty, he had a mother and brothers and sisters and friends who he loved deeply. And Jesus knows he's going to be rejected when he gets into the city. And that makes him sad. It makes him sad not for himself, but for those who would reject him. It breaks his heart because he knows that he is the way to eternal life, and apart from him, they are missing out on joy and peace. He says in verse 42, "Would that you, even you, had known this day the things that make for peace." Jesus truly cares. He truly cares about people, and he is feeling the weight of their brokenness as he enters into the city. I get that. I can understand that. But none of this is catching Jesus by surprise. Jesus is also 100% truly God. He's totally sovereign over the events that are playing out. So sovereign, remember, that he could force praise from the stones if he wanted to. Why? Because the design of all of creation is that Jesus Christ will be praised, that Christ will be exalted. And if people won't do it, he's going to see to it that rocks do it. In other words, he is completely sovereign over everything that has ever happened, that's happening here in our passage, or that ever will happen. And yet here he stops and weeps over a city that's going to reject it. And I'm like, what? I don't get it. Why is he weeping? And why does Luke take special care to tell us about it? Well, he's not weeping because he's afraid of the cross. We know that because his face is set to Jerusalem, remember? Or he's not weeping because he feels like a failure. He hasn't failed in the slightest. This is his plan. And this is where we should pause and really press in, like Hosea 6:3 says, and let's press in to know the Lord, because it's difficult for us to fully grasp and wrap our minds around the person of Jesus Christ, but just try for a second. He is more complex than we imagine him to be. He's like us, but not. He feels like we feel, but not from a place of finite sinfulness, from a place of infinite perfection and eternal holiness. He is beyond our comprehension, but he reveals himself in ways that even children can understand. He's mighty enough to raise a dead man with 2 words, "Come forth," and he's tender enough to comfort Mary's broken heart when she came to his tomb to mourn him, and he simply said 1 word. He just looked at her and said, "Mary." There's a beautiful, harmonious tension that we see when the divine mingles with humanity, and it's summed up in our King Jesus. And this encourages me to press into his Holy Spirit when I don't understand, and it allows us to rest and put our faith and trust in him when we can't fully comprehend him. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I do not want a God that I can fully understand. Because if I can, that means he's exactly like me. And if he's exactly like me, guess what? That's bad. It's very bad. But I do want a God who is beyond me, yet understands me. And that's what we have in Jesus. And here we see him weeping because he understands us and what we go through. I don't know where we got off thinking that Jesus is some distant, angry God ready to zap us with a lightning bolt the very second that we screw up. My Bible tells me that Jesus is near to the brokenhearted and he is able to sympathize with us in our weakness. Jesus understands. He understands everything about you. He understands everything that you're going through. Every struggle, every temptation, even the areas of our lives that need to be cleaned out. We see him weeping. He's weeping because he understands. And he truly cares about the human condition. He cares about you today. I want to hear that. John Piper worded it like this: Jesus feels the sorrow of the situation. Yes, there is a deep inner peace in Jesus that his Father is in complete control and that his purpose will come to pass, but that doesn't mean that he can't cry. It's like when we lose a loved one, we know that God has a plan and a purpose, but it still breaks our heart, right? Jesus is a king like no other. Merciful, caring, compassionate, selfless, sacrificial, loving. I could go on, but now we see Jesus, our king, and he enters the temple. So remember, we've already talked about the significance of the temple, right? But look with me, verse 45. And he entered the temple and began to drive out those who sold, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer, but you have made it into a den of robbers." Okay. I get confused easy. So we see Jesus on a trip, going into the city of Jerusalem. He stops. He weeps over the city. Then he turns around, walks in, and starts kicking people out of the temple. I'm like, what the heck? What the heck is actually going on right now? Like Matthew and Mark tell us that he was flipping over tables and driving people out. The Gospel of John tells us that he fashioned a whip out of some cords and was driving people out. What's going on right now? He's pretty upset, right? My brain, for some reason, pictured. You guys know that show, Hell's Kitchen? Anybody ever watch it? You know when Gordon Ramsay gets upset at the chefs who can't cook and he kicks them out? He's like, "Get out!" That's the way that my mind pictures this happening. But why? Why would Jesus just walk into the temple and start kicking people out? Let me try to paint the picture for us so we understand a little bit better. Jesus entered into the temple at Passover. So at that time of year, people from everywhere were coming to the temple to make their Passover sacrifices, right? I'm talking tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of people. But as travelers came to make their sacrifices at the temple, it didn't make a whole lot of sense for them to bring their sacrificial animals with them a very long distance. So animals would be available for sale in Jerusalem at the Passover, either a goat or a sheep, or if a person couldn't afford a goat or a sheep, they could sacrifice a pigeon or a dove. So all of the sacrificial animals were for sale here in the temple. The problem is that just like most things, people screwed it up. Most of the Jews also paid a temple tax at Passover, and so there were money changers there to convert Roman money into the appropriate money for the temple tax and also to purchase the sacrificial animals, all right? It was a currency exchange. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I remember when I was in South America, I was very thankful that I could exchange my dollars for Peruvian money, because if I couldn't, I'd have been in bad shape. But remember, the temple is a house of prayer. The temple is set apart for communion with God. And Jesus comes to the temple and he sees these money changers, and they've got their table set up and they're charging ridiculous interest rates to change money. And not only that, they were exploiting poor people by greatly overcharging, not just for a sheep or a goat, but even for the poor man's offering of a pigeon and a dove. And to make matters worse, these merchants were likely set up in the court of the Gentiles, which, mind you, is the only place that we would have been allowed. And it would have made that area completely useless as a place of prayer or a place of worship, because all of the hustle and bustle that was going on, right? And that may not seem like a very big deal to you, but we have to remember the significance of the court of the Gentiles. The court of the Gentiles was God's way of saying, I have made provision for people from every nation, people, tribe, and tongue to come to me. My Messiah, who we know to be Jesus, will deliver all people, not just Israel. The court of the Gentiles was symbolically designed to say, all the nations may seek the Lord and find him and be restored to God. And these people were hindering other people from coming to God. How often do we do that? Can I just throw that question out there? How often do we look around at a broken world and say, you need to get your act together before you can come to God? Gosh, it's the other way around. People come to God and he'll help us get our act together. But it's no wonder that when Jesus walked into the temple, he was upset, right? He sees his temple defiled. And so what does he do? He does some spring cleaning. He cleanses the temple. He gets rid of all of the barriers that are standing in the way of God being worshiped rightly, and he gets rid of all the barriers that are standing in the way of the temple being used for its intended purpose. And let's not overlook or minimize what just happened, because not only is Jesus fulfilling Psalm 69, but he is showing his complete authority to purify and take charge of the temple, and that's something no one but the Messiah would have had the authority to do. So this shows us two things. One, it shows us that Jesus is very concerned about the purity of our acts of worship and the motivation behind them. Secondly, it shows us that the purification of the temple was necessary in order for the temple to be used for its intended purpose. Because verse 47 of our passage tells us, and he was in the temple teaching daily. So if we read from our passage here today all the way until Jesus is arrested, we see that he was teaching in the temple every day the last week of his life. That's why the temple was there, for worship to happen. And when Jesus cleared it, that's what happened, worship. So here we are today. We've got our compassionate, merciful, sovereign, gracious King of Kings. He enters into the temple. He sees the temple defiled. He does some spring cleaning. He cleanses the temple. He restores it to be used for its intended purpose and allow true and pure worship to take place there. So much like the spring cleaning that we have to do at our homes or in our yards every year, this cleaning was necessary and this cleaning was beneficial. But I'm not here today just to tell you of a cool story that Jesus did on the first Palm Sunday. I'm here to tell you something cool that Jesus is doing right here, right now, on this Palm Sunday in 2021. We have a sin problem. It started way back with the first humans God ever created in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were living in perfect fellowship with God in the Garden of Eden, but long story short, they were tempted, they sinned, and as a result, there came a separation between God and humanity, and all of creation is subject to brokenness because of it. Look around. Everything that you see that is bad and horrible in this world is a result of the fall of man. Cancer, death, racism, selfishness, covetousness, idolatry, all of it. It's all broken as a result of the fall. That's going to bother me more than it bothers anybody. Each and every one of us is born into a sin nature, meaning that we were born with a nature that automatically wants to rebel against God and His ways. But a long time ago, God provided a way that we could be in fellowship with Him. He gave the law to Moses way back in the book of Exodus. But that law was temporary. It was basically a list of do's and do nots and ritual sacrifices for purification and forgiveness of sin. My boy, my man in the clutch. Hello? Let me back up. We're sinners. God provided a way that we could be in fellowship with Him. He gave the law to Moses, and the law was temporary. Picture a list of do's and do-nots, rituals for sacrifices, purification of sins. As a matter of fact, animal sacrifices that were going on in our passage made up a large part of the Old Covenant worship. But the law was given not so that God could train us to be a group of well-behaved rule followers. The law was given to show humanity that there is absolutely nothing that we can do in order to earn a right standing with God. It's impossible. No human being could keep just the 10 Commandments, much less the entire law of Moses. But every single part of the law, every sacrifice, every rule, every dietary restriction was there to point to a new and everlasting covenant that was coming. One that was greater, one that was permanent, one that could only be fulfilled through the coming Messiah. And we know this Messiah to be for certain our King who is like no other, our King Jesus. He gave up His heavenly status as King over all creation and humbled Himself to come to earth in the likeness of a man. He fulfilled every letter of the law for us. He never sinned, and in His sinlessness, He proved to be a suitable sacrifice on our behalf. He's a spotless Passover lamb. He was sacrificed on a cross to atone once and for all for our sins, and He rose 3 days later victorious over sin and death. And next week, we are going to celebrate that fact, and we're going to celebrate it huge. So be here and invite 3 people. But in doing all of that, Jesus established a new covenant in His blood, and it's ours if we put our trust and faith in Him as the Lord of our lives. And under this new covenant, things have changed. Jesus has fulfilled the temple and the sacrificial system according to the book of Hebrews chapter 10 that I don't have time to read all of it today, but I wish I did, and I want you to go back and fact check me. Please read all of Hebrews 10 today. But Jesus has fulfilled the temple and its sacrificial system. And since He's done that, there is no longer a need for a temple building. Well, if there's no longer a need for a temple building, why does it matter if Jesus cleansed the temple? Well, I'm glad you asked. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own. You were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. All right? Let's look at 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4. As you come to him, a living stone rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious, you yourselves, like living stones, are being built up as a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. You see, under the new covenant in Jesus Christ, we are living stones. We are the temple of God. We are the temple of the Holy Spirit. And Paul tells us in Romans chapter 12 to offer our bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. This is our spiritual act of worship. Worship is what happens in a temple. So my point today is that since there is no longer a single location where all Christians must go to worship, as a follower of Christ, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit. I am the temple of the Holy Spirit. How amazing is that? The Spirit of the everlasting, living God lives in you. So that means true worship, pure worship. It can happen at your house. It can happen at a movie theater, in your school cafeteria, on the seashore. Any location where every aspect of your life is wholly submitted to the authority of Christ, no matter what you're doing. And when that happens, we can worship God purely, rightly, and be used for His intended purpose, which is to be a reflection of His glory, to shine a light in this messed up world. And so my question today, I asked a similar question at the beginning. Are there any areas in your life that you'd like to change? My question now is that when Jesus does a hard examination of your life, will He find a pure temple or will He find a temple defiled? If Jesus walked in the back door right now, or if He walked in your front door, if you're at home watching, and He sat down beside you, would He look at you and say, man, congratulations, you've made it. You arrived, bro. You're doing real good. Or would He say, there's some tables that need to be flipped today? And can we just not play church games for a second? Can we all just be real honest and admit right here, right now, that there are some tables in each one of our lives that need to be flipped? Each and every one of us have areas in our lives that we are not fully submitting to the authority of Jesus Christ. What are they? What are they in your life? We have a sufficient, caring, gracious King who is able to help us, according to Hebrews chapter 2, not condemn. If we read through all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, we see time and time again where Jesus' teachings are in direct opposition to the Pharisees and the temple authorities. But in each one of those situations, Jesus didn't try to punk people out. He didn't try to embarrass them. He didn't try to defeat them. Rather, He wanted to engage them. And if possible, He wanted to instruct them regarding His kingdom. He's gracious, He's merciful, He's loving, He's caring, He's gentle. He wept over unrepentant hearts of Jerusalem that first Palm Sunday, and He still weeps over our hardness of heart today. And even now, He's at the right hand of the Father, and He's interceding for you. He's interceding for you. He's interceding for you. He's interceding for me. So let's be honest this morning. Let's do some self-examination. Let's allow the Lord to reveal the things in our lives that we need to submit to His authority. And I'm not going to ask anybody else to stand up or to say anything, but I am willing to admit to you guys today that a table in my life that needs to be flipped is negativity. I sometimes have a tendency to go to worst case scenario just like that. That's not beneficial. That's not who God has called me to be. But it's something that I have to submit to His authority every day press into his Holy Spirit to help me overcome. And that may not seem like such a big deal to you today, but to be honest, that was just the one table in my life that needs to be flipped that I felt comfortable sharing in front of a group. We all have tables, plural, in our lives that we need to allow the Lord to flip. So as the band comes, I want you to bow your head with me. And I want you to examine your heart. Ask the Lord in this moment to reveal to you the tables that need to be flipped in your life so that your worship can be pure and you will be an effective agent of restoration for the kingdom. Maybe yours is greed. Maybe yours is addiction of some form. Maybe it's a shady business practice at work, or maybe it's really just not even doing your job that well. Maybe you're a liar. Maybe you're in a relationship that you know isn't honoring to God. Maybe you're a little bit uppity. Maybe you're a know-it-all. Maybe you're a hypocrite. Maybe you're harboring some hurt and bitterness towards someone in your life, and you're not letting it go. And there's no room for healing or growth because you're just hanging on. And that root of bitterness has grown into a tree. On the other side of that coin, maybe you're enabling somebody to hang on to a root of bitterness. I know when our friends want to talk to us, they need a listening ear. Sometimes it's easy for us to just gas them up instead of speaking Jesus into their life and helping to lead them to a place of healing. Maybe you've never submitted your life to the authority of Christ in the first place, and today is the day of salvation for you. Maybe, like my old football helmet, you're hanging on to something that meant something to you at one point, but now it's just taking up space. Maybe like those VHS tapes, you're hanging on to something just in case it ever presents itself as more valuable than Christ, and you won't have it on standby. So what tables in your life need to be flipped today? What's keeping you from being an effective witness for the gospel? What's keeping your worship from being pure? I can't know. All I can know is that we all have areas in our life where spring cleaning needs to happen. It's necessary, and I promise you, it's beneficial. Let's submit those areas to the Lord today. I'm going to pray, and we're going to sing a closing song. And if you need prayer or you want to talk with anybody after the service, just please stay seated after we dismiss, and we will come to you. Myself, Pastor Matt, Pastor Conrad, Reuben, Bree, any of our prayer team will make ourselves available to you after the service. Just stay seated when we dismiss. But today, let today be the day of cleansing in the temple of your life. Lord Jesus, I pray for the grace for us to admit that there are areas in our life that we need to submit wholly to your authority. Lord Jesus, I pray that you would give us the strength to repent. Lord, I pray that you would change our mind about those areas and that we would agree with you that they're sinful and they do not honor you, Lord. Lord, come into our lives and spring clean our hearts today so that we could be effective for your kingdom, for your gospel. Lord, do your work in us. We love you. It's your name we pray. Amen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We hope that you've been blessed by the service. If you don't have a church home, we would love for you to consider being a part of Christ Community Church. And you can connect with us by going to cccfamily.com. Let us know that you've been joining us for church. You can fill out the online Connect card there. Give us your information. We can help you take the next step. If you have a prayer concern that you'd like our prayer teams to pray about, you can do that as well. If you'd like to support the ministry here at Christ Community Church, you can also give online at cccfamily.com, and we appreciate all that God is doing in and through each and every one of you. Hey, thanks again for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you again soon, either online or in person. God bless you.